Hello, my name is Andrew Keene. Welcome to Keene on America, the daily interview show about the United States. Hello, everybody. A couple of weeks ago, there was something called an absolute bloodbath at the Washington Post, laid off hundreds of workers, the death in some ways of the Washington Post, at least according to some people. And indeed, it represents the gutting of its book coverage. The Washington Post closed its book page, according to Becca Rothfeld, who's been on the show before. She's the author of an interesting critical book, All Things Are Too Small. She had a piece in the New Yorker called The Death of Book World. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk to Keene on America's resident book expert, Bethanne Patrick, who's the book critic of the LA Times, fortunately, not the Washington Post, for her response. Bethanne, I know you've looked at Rothfeld's piece in the New Yorker on the death of the book world. How miserable is this news from a book point of view?
The news is very sad. I wrote for the Washington Post book world for a number of years, and I counted its fiction books editor and newsletter, book club newsletter editor, Ron Charles, among my dear friends. I still count Ron among my dear friends. He's still with us. He's just no longer at the Washington Post, which is a big shame. But a lot of other people, like the editor of Book World, which was just revived in 2022, John Williams, is gone. Becca Rothfeld herself, who was the nonfiction critic at the Post Book World, is gone, along with a number of other really fantastic critical writers, minds, people who cared about books and everything that they represent. It is a big blow for the literary world, the publishing world, the reading world. And no one is unaware of it. No one is happy about it, except maybe someone who takes care of the bottom line somewhere. Not sure.
Maybe Jeff Bezos, although
yeah.
one wonders whether he reads.
Maybe his wife's plastic surgeon. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you're if Jeff Bezos' new wife's plastic surgeon out there, good news for you. Rothfeld made the argument in the New Yorker that we need generalized criticisms. There's still a lot of specialized magazines on and offline. There's Substack, of course. There's shows like this. But the argument that Rothfeld made was that the generalized review is really important. Do you agree with her?
I do agree with her. However, I don't know if she and I are even speaking to a general public anymore. And this is something I've been talking about recently with a couple of colleagues. We used to know that newspapers and certain magazines, Time, Newsweek, Life magazine, etc. Maybe I'm going a little bit too far back in the past, but we knew that there was a general public out there looking at them, looking for guidance about what to read, what to pay attention to, what to see, all kinds of things. We still have some general publications like that, like the New Yorker, where Rothfeld has landed, thankfully, because she really is a brilliant critic, I think. But there are fewer and fewer of them. And I think part of the problem is that we have splintered the general public, not just into interest groups, but into generational interest groups as well. We say, oh, go ahead, be interested in whatever music, films, books you're interested in. You don't have to care about what we care about anymore. And I don't just mean older people, I mean, younger people as well. And it's really difficult, but I don't know how you get around it, Andrew. We have so much pulling at our attention all the time. We have so much news that we need to keep track of right now in the United States alone. And there's TV to hopefully take us away from it sometimes. There are movies to bring us into it and take us away from it. But it's just all so much. And it's really tough to think that there's someone out there who wants a newspaper or a magazine the way they used to be, with here's your TV page, here's your books page, here's your health page. It seems like a model that doesn't work for the way we read now.
Right, and I know you've been following another interesting story about the collapse of mass market paperbacks. I grew up with paperbacks like Valley of the Dolls and Jaws, Peter Benchley's great book, which of course was turned into the Spielberg movie, but the book existed before the movie. How important is this? Lots of articles in the last few weeks about the end of cheap books, for better or worse.
Well, you know, I think there's always a market for cheap books. Do cheap books have to be a certain trim size that fits in a pocket, when there are a lot of people who don't carry anything in their pockets anymore? Maybe they're carrying them. Yeah, exactly. So there's always going to be a market out there who wants their books cheaper, or, you know, from the library, or for free, or so on and so forth. But the thing about mass market paperbacks is that for many people like us, you know, who grew up with them, they were both cheap and convenient at the time. And so the nostalgia factor is really, really high. So many people think, oh, those were what got me into reading. Well, guess what? If you are, I don't know, 16 or 20 years old now, what gets you into reading might be an e-galley of a book, or an audiobook that you get on Libby from your local library. So it's sort of, I think the nostalgia factor is a little too high, and people forget that mass market paperbacks aren't necessarily the best vehicle for prose. Look, you can argue all day long about other things in analog form, right? Like vinyl. Okay, there's a warmer sound when you play an LP, but a mass market paperback is made of very cheap pulp. That's the reason people call things pulp fiction, right? They yellow, they start smelling, they fall apart. The glue isn't very strong. The print is really small, and so they might have been very affordable, and they might have been very easy to stuff in a purse or the back pocket of a pair of jeans, but they aren't necessarily the best vehicle.
Okay, so from a consumer point of view, you may be right, but of course the Beatles had a very successful song in the 60s called Paperback Writer, and at some point, perhaps all of us wanted to be paperback writers. From a writer's point of view, Bethanne, is this end of mass market paperbacks, for better or worse, on a commercial front, is it good or bad for writers? I assume it's not great news. I mean, there aren't going to be any James Mitcheners or Jacqueline Suzannes or
listen, there are already, look, Colleen Hoover's doing just fine without mass market paperbacks. Thank you very much. Okay. And believe me, I'm not a big Colleen Hoover reader or anything like that.
And just explain who she is.
Sorry. Colleen Hoover is the self-published author of It Starts With Us and It Ends With Us, and a whole slew of titles in between that are perhaps not the best written fiction, but they've really grabbed women, very young women, but women of all ages, hard, because they really bring out emotions. And so Hoover is, you know, got sales up the yin yang. Don't ask me, Andrew, for, you know, sales numbers right now.
I mean, they're probably the equivalent now of of a Jacqueline Suzanne book.
Well,
Written for
exactly. That's
men.
what I was
These
going
are
to
written
say.
for women. Valley of the Dolls made men happy. Colleen Hoover makes women happy.
That's right.
Before I want to get to audiobooks in a minute,
Sure.
Bethanne. I was going to call you Jacqueline, but Bethanne. But before we get there, what does this mean for the New York Times? The New York Times is so successful on so many fronts. It's very profitable. It's the reverse of the Washington Post. Its book review seems to be ubiquitous in a literary sense. Do you think it's? I mean, in its own way, of course, the book review is a wonderful product, and everybody reads it in the literary world. But is it good for the New York, from a literary industry point of view? Is it good to have one publication, the New York Times, so dominant?
No, it isn't. I mean, it's wonderful that the New York Times book review exists, and long may it reign in its place. But more book reviews is better for the publishing industry and the literary world at large. Okay. No one wants to be able to say, hey, the New York Times didn't pick up your book, so there won't be a review at all. It used to be, at least you knew if you didn't get a review in the New York Times book review, that there were all of these other places that might choose to review your books. The Minneapolis Star Tribune, the Chicago Tribune, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the San Francisco Chronicle. I could go on. Oh, and the Washington Post.
Don't forget your own paper, the LA
The Los
Times,
Angeles Times, here I am.
where you continue to write.
Yes, not even a book review this week. Actually, a little essay about songs based on novels. But that's okay, because it's still
with the
about
wonderful
books.
title, The Other Kate Bush Banger That Deserves a Comeback Right Now.
Thank you. I love that title. And it is really interesting to see how much attention a book, for instance, like Wuthering Heights, which is, of course, why I was writing that piece.
Yeah, and I'm going to see the movie in a couple of days.
Yeah, it's
getting great reviews. I mean, it's set up for reviewers, high-end critics to kind of to undermine, but it seems to be actually getting surprisingly good reviews. But
it is, even if the New York Times called it florid and overstuffed, it is getting other really excellent reviews.
That's a good reason to go and see it. If the New York Times thinks it's florid and overstuffed, then it must be a lot of fun.
So it's not a good thing for there to be just one book review of note. I mean, the Boston Globe is still running book reviews. I'm sure there are some other papers out there that are doing so as well, but it truly is becoming a desert right now for book publicists. And I feel for all of my colleagues bless you.
Yeah, well, that must be why all the book publicists are desperate to get their authors on Keen on America.
That's right. And a lot of the book publicists and authors are flocking to Substack as well. Believe me, I'm seeing them.
Yeah, well, we're all flocking to Substack, which is good news for Substack. Although, again, to come back to general interest readers, I'm not sure it's so good. I mean, you have to be a specialist to go on Substack, whereas the Post, the Times, I mean, they do cater, and even the New Yorker, although perhaps a little lesser, they do cater to a general interest readership.
Well, what I will say about Substack, because, mostly it is, you're right, people are in niches on Substack. The thing
Except you and I,
about
of
it
course.
is, and what I think is really important here is people have left Substack because of its leadership and some of their policies, right? And that happens with everything. And something else we're going to be talking about today, not that I want to, get ahead of things, is another company, Spotify, that has a lot of people who think its practices are really terrible. Spotify has run ads for ICE recruitment. And so it's getting harder and harder to stick to being an ethical consumer if that's what you are trying to be.
Although I will say, I don't want to turn this into a Substack conversation.
No,
But
no, and not at all.
I think some of the reaction, I'm happily on Substack, and I hope many of our viewers and listeners will be watching this on Substack. I think the criticism of Substack was absurd. I mean, I think
and I'm on Substack
you can
as
have
well.
publications from people you don't like or agree with doesn't mean that you should get off the platform.
No, that's not what I was going to say. What I was going to say is that there are problems with so many companies. So we're sitting here bemoaning the loss of Book World at the Washington Post, Andrew. And we all have hated, still hate, will continue to hate the fact that Jeff Bezos is running the Washington Post into the ground. We also, many of us, dislike Jeff Bezos's practices at Amazon. And yet many of us continue to use Amazon.
And what about his wife's plastic surgeon?
All I know is it's extensive. Okay,
there's probably a whole hospital of Bezos.
A whole wing, at least.
Definitely a whole team.
Yeah, it's really tough to say this is the place to be. This is an okay place. I feel safe here. And so that is something, and this is what I was getting to in my very, very verbose way. It's harder and harder to find a place where you can find a general reader because there's no place that we all feel sort of safe with. And I don't know if we were right to feel safe in the past. I'm just saying.
I mean, I don't care for that word safe. That is another complicated world. I mean, your own publication, the LA Times, has been in the news a lot. Yes. How are things there?
Well, I am full-time freelance, so I don't really know that much about how things are there. What I do know is that my editor is terrific. Shout out to Sophia Kircher at the LA Times, who's recently taken over books coverage. I believe she does some other areas as well, but as far as I can tell, everything is going, well over there. And the LA Times coverage of books is fine, but it had already changed from the year. I've been writing for the LA Times for about 7 years now. And when I started, it was any book that was really important deserved, consideration or at least a pitch. Now, the editors have a real imperative to find California stories, LA stories. That's not bad. That's not wrong. It's just a change.
Let's get some better news. I mean, when we talk about books, it always seems to be bad news. But you mentioned Spotify, Bethanne, and I thought that, and this is something I sent you last week, and I wanted to talk about Spotify, who, as you know, somewhat controversial for some people, although not for me, are soon going to offer physical books. They've done a deal with Bookstore, Bookshop, which compete with Amazon, in terms of bringing together the physical and audio books. And I think it's very encouraging. And I also think it speaks to the deficiencies in Amazon, the fact that they're continually wanting to sell us both physical and audio books, which is through Audible, which is incredibly annoying. I always feel as a consumer that if I buy a physical book on Amazon, then I should get the audio book for free, especially since it doesn't really cost them anything, and even vice versa. But anyway, tell us about this Spotify bookshop deal. I think it's very encouraging.
I think it's very interesting, and it's not as much of a shocker as some people seem to think it is. It is not as if Spotify is opening a bookstore on, Rodeo Drive or Fifth Avenue. It's an affiliate, just like the other affiliates that Spotify works in partnerships with. And so bookshop.org is a tremendous and really important company run by Andy Hunter, who also was part of the founding of LitHub. Andy went to bookshop.org, which he founded, and has really done some incredible things there in the past years. First of all, every purchase made at Bookshop benefits independent bookstores somewhere. You can even designate your local independent bookstore as the one that should benefit if you want to, or you can just put it in the communal independent bookstore pot, as it were. They have done a lot of innovation with the way they sell ebooks. And now they are offering people who are listening to books on Spotify or hearing about books in a podcast the ability to quickly and easily go and click a link and get a physical copy of that book. And that will benefit independent bookstores even more. So this is all about not Spotify becoming a bookseller. It's about Spotify offering its audience a chance to do things from where they already are. So it's a convenience factor for would-be readers, if you will. There are a lot of people who have chit-chatted about this on the socials and, discussion boards on Reddit and Quora and that kind of thing, who talk about the fact that, sometimes you hear an audiobook or you hear an author on a show like this one, and you think, I want their book, I want it right now. And this is saying, here's your link, go ahead, buy Bethanne Patrick's memoir, Life Be. So
Absolutely. I hope everyone buys that.
it makes it that much easier.
And you can get it through your link tree.
That's right. You can. You absolutely can. It's a great service to authors and to readers in its way. That doesn't mean it's the only place that you can find readers or the only place you can buy books. Of course, bookshop.org is fully set up for you to go to anytime.
Yeah, and we often in this show, if I would rather link with bookshop.org than Amazon, although sometimes one doesn't have any choice.
Exactly.
What about on the audiobook front, Bethanne? I'm a very enthusiastic audiobook person.
Mm-hmm.
Are you one of these literary people who don't consider audiobooks real reading? What's your take on it? And how healthy is that sector now in the book business?
Well, first of all, I'm not one of these literary people who considers anything not reading. I believe in ebooks, audiobooks. I believe in graphic books, novels, memoirs, etc. I say reading, it's hard enough to get people to read and get them interested and help them find books they love. So when they do, give them the access. However, one thing I will say about audiobooks that not everyone knows is that science has found they do reach the same part of our brain as reading a book on paper does. It's the same process neurologically, even if it isn't the same process intellectually. And so I've talked about this a lot. When my husband discovered audiobooks 5 or 6 years ago, it completely changed his reading life. He'd always been a reader. He's always been, he's a lawyer. He's always been someone who knew how to read and write and all that kind of thing. But he started reading so many different books, longer books by authors he never would have picked up before, many, many women novelists. He started reading more historical fiction, all through audiobooks. So I think that audiobooks can really, really help people expand their reading life. I don't know if it's the same thing. I don't know if it does the same thing for your attention as reading a printed page does. But we read for so many different purposes, Andrew. Some of us are reading because we're trying to argue a point. Some of us are reading so we can escape our daily lives. Some of us are reading so we can learn about a place we're about to travel to. I don't know. I'm pretty open-minded when it comes to reading, all persuasions of reading. No
You're
judgment.
always open-minded. That's why I have you on the show all the time. There was a piece I also sent you from Publishers Weekly on ElevenLabs, one of the new highly financed AI companies valued at $11 billion is doubling down on audio books. Should we be wary of AI-produced audiobooks, or is that just another reality, Bethanne, that we have to get used to and realize is the future, for better or worse?
This is something that I am struggling with in my own reading and thinking right now, because AI is here. Let's face it, we cannot avoid it completely. I certainly believe, and most of my fellow creative writers believe, that we shouldn't be using AI to write books that we are then selling as the product of an author or a couple of authors, right? Because one of the joys of reading is it's the way two consciousnesses, excuse me, can meet in the, in the ether without any kind of radio waves or satellite towers or any satellites or towers or anything. So I think it's really disingenuous to put writing out that's AI generated and say, look, I'm the author of this. There are already books written by AI. There are going to be many, many more.
Well, no, but my question, I take your point on AI and writing, but what about using AI bots to read books?
I'm sorry, and I was being long-winded again, and so I was getting to that. And the AI bots to produce audiobooks. That is really an interesting thing.
And it's an expensive business. I mean, I've been into the studio for a couple of my books, and it takes a lot of time and quite a lot of resources and investment.
I narrated the audiobook of my memoir, and it was a wonderful experience. Let's
just remember everyone what that memoir was.
Life Be.
Life Be, and you can go to Bethanne Patrick's Linktree to get the book.
Look at this. I mean, I am lucky to be getting this kind of promotion.
I get my 10%, of course, on the sale.
That's right. That's right. But what I was going to say about that is it was so well produced. It was done with Audible because, long story, but my publisher hadn't bought the audio rights. And so it was a separate deal. Anyway, I had a great time doing it. I'm really, really pleased with how it came out. And I wonder about these audiobooks. They're not going to sound dead because these AI generated voices are very good, as we all know. It's a matter of how much artifice we want to let into our lives. I saw a piece the other day. I don't know if it was in a newspaper or a magazine, but it was basically saying what would happen if a Bridgerton character met a Jane Austen character. And it was contrasting, the Bridgerton character looking very, sort of ridiculously fancy and primped, and the Jane Austen character looking much duller and more everyday because Jane Austen wrote about real people, and I thought of this with audiobooks. Are people going to want the audiobook with the author reading, or are they going to want this version that we've come to be accustomed to in the past several years, maybe even a little bit longer, where there's a great actor hired to read the audiobook, right? And now we're in this third tier where it's just the great actor's voice being used. There's no acting, it's like ElevenLabs does all different kinds of audiobook tiers. You can do a really simply produced audiobook. You can do more of the middle level and get a little bit of production, or you can do a super duper level.
Right, and of course, some of these virtual companies, these AI companies, are being sued by authors and other people for stealing their intellectual property, sometimes even their voices. I wonder whether, Bethanne, this speaks of, there's a popular phrase these days, fashionable phrase called Enshittification, which was invented by Cory Doctorow.
Yes.
Whether this speaks again to the Enshittification of the literary world. You're going to have all these AI produced audiobooks, and then there'll still be a small high end of books which are read by famous authors or actors, but very little in between. Rather like the literary world now, where the New York Times continues to prosper, but there's nothing else really out there.
Well, you know, the New York Times is prospering because of its games app and its cooking app. That's where all the money's being made for the New York Times. I don't think people realize that. And we, you know, have said in publishing for decades, look, a rising tide lifts all ships. So if you have a huge blockbuster Peter Benchley or Jacqueline Suzanne novel, then that allows, you know, some poetry chapbooks to come out, or a
they don't
literary
sell
novel
anymore. Jaws or Valley of the Dolls, that's the end of the mass market paperback.
Well, that's the end of the mass market paperback as a form, but we still have plenty of blockbusters out there. Look, James Patterson and Harlan Coben will write them with anyone at this point. Reese Witherspoon, you know, I don't know, former first ladies, former presidents, it doesn't matter. You can write with one of these gentlemen. And there's lots of blockbusters that are making publishers lots of money. Look, publishing, we know this, it's a flat industry when it comes to profit. There's never going to be huge profit margins in book publishing. However, when we look at something like ElevenLabs, which is valued at $11 billion, you know, call us, call me, call Andrew. We're ready anytime, ElevenLabs. They are sometimes going to be working on a blockbuster, big, maybe they'll find a Colleen Hoover out there. I don't know. But I do think people have to do more of their own work now. The general public has to do more of its own work to consider what quality is and what quality they want. Do you want to eat a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese, or do you want to make a really good homemade mac and cheese from a recipe on the New York Times cooking app?
Yeah, I was going to talk about the New York Times. One wonders, though, you've talked about the $11 billion valuation of ElevenLabs. One wonders when the correction comes, which it will.
Yes.
Interesting to see how severe that correction is.
Yes.
One wonders whether they'll be worth 11 billion this time next year, or next time in a couple of years. Finally, Bethanne, you and I met years ago on a company, on a platform that was then called Twitter. Now it's called X. You still have 185,000 followers. I know you have an ambivalent relationship with
I
X.
do, and they just keep leaving, and I haven't been on there in probably months at this point.
Well, but what's the role of social media? I know now you're on Blue Sky, and you were involved in an interesting exchange this week on the value of criticism. How could or should social media fit into this new ecosystem?
Well, you know, I spent 15 years of my life that I'll never get back on social media. However, it afforded me the opportunity to meet colleagues like you, whom I now know in real life, and work with so many people in the publishing industry and in the literary world. And I do, you know, I may not be able to get those years back, but I don't regret it. I think that it hit its mark at a point in time where people were really hungry for a way to connect in a world that had become so internet driven and dominant. So many of us spending so much time at our screens. I don't know what the role of it is now. I've tried TikTok a little bit. It's just not for me. And really, even Blue Sky is hardly for me anymore. It is a place where I find it difficult to get real conversations going. And, you know, if you talk to someone else, they might say, what is Bethanne Patrick going on about? I have great conversations on Blue Sky. There's so many intangible things about each kind of social
It seems intellectually very much, I mean, my sense of Blue Sky is very much of an intellectual ghetto where There's not a lot of, I mean, there wasn't never that much on Twitter or on X, but even less on Blue Sky.
Yeah, even less on Blue Sky, absolutely. So I am not sure. One thing I do know for sure is that we've been talking about Substack, and my friend and colleague Ron Charles has started his own Substack, which
Good.
looks like it's going to be very close to his book club newsletter. He will continue in the vein of being a critic and a journalist who looks at all kinds of great stories that are related to
Yeah,
books.
we'll have to get Ron on the show. Obviously,
Definitely.
the billion-dollar question is what kind of business model he'll use. Finally, Bethanne, lots of bad news on the book front, some encouraging, but let's end with a book. I know you're continuing to write for the LA Times. You're always reading something. We'll be back with more regular shows with you later in the year on books that you recommend for the spring. But what are you reading at the moment? Any good?
Oh gosh, that this is the thing. Every time someone asks me, I'm put on the spot, and my brain goes blank for a second.
Well, maybe just anything
Just
encouraging. What should we read? Maybe Jaws?
Oh no, do not read Jaws. I will tell you exactly what I'm reading, and I will tell you because I have my little e-reader. I am reading a delightful, but it's not out yet, book called The Adjunct by Maria Adelman, about an English lit adjunct in Baltimore, Maryland, and how her former mentor or advisor in her doctoral program writes a best-selling novel that might be about her, and everyone thinks it's about her, and she's trying to sort of get through the year, and she has almost no money, and it's very funny. It's very sharp. It is right up to the minute. And I know because I teach as an adjunct at American University in DC that her observations about what it's like to, share an office space, what it's like to try to hold office hours and see your students. It's really, really good. And so I think that's one that I will be recommending to a lot of people.
Well, there you have it. That's our book news for the week. The Washington Post has gutted its book business, but Spotify is doing an interesting deal with bookstores. So there's some positive optimism in the book business. Bethanne Patrick, as always, the book critic of the LA Times. Keep going. You're still standing. And we'll be back to our regular book-centric broadcasts in the future. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye, Andrew.
Hi, this is Andrew again. Thank you so much for listening or watching the show. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. We're on Substack, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, all the platforms. And I'd be very curious as to your comments as well on what you think of the show, how it can be improved, and the kinds of guests that you would enjoy hearing or listening to in future. Thank you again.